Chrono Trigger is legendary. It's one of those top-shelf RPGs that we all know as representing some of the pinnacle of what the genre has to offer. And despite the fact that it was released in 1996 in the West, few games have been able to create a similar experience. Why is that? And what gives Chrono Trigger its staying power that has allowed it to remain in the hearts and minds of RPG fans for so long? In lieu of a typical review today, I want to take a look at what makes Chrono Trigger so good. And I think that a good place to start is at the start of Chrono Trigger's development.
Hironobu Sakaguchi, Yuji Horii, and Akira Toriyama are three legendary creators whose names you should know. Yuji Horii is the mind behind Dragon Quest, one of the first Japanese RPGs, and absolutely the most influential series that helped shape what the genre would eventually become. Akira Toriyama is the mangaka or writer and artist behind the widely renowned Dragon Ball series, as well as the enemy and character designer for the Dragon Quest franchise. Hironobu Sakaguchi is the creator of the Final Fantasy series, which pushed the JRPG genre to new heights in terms of both a technical and narrative standpoint. These three creative forces came together to work on something really special, with the goal of making something no one had ever done before. And on that front, they have certainly succeeded. The release of Chrono Trigger brought as many innovative new ideas to the RPG genre in a single game as we had seen in the entire decade prior to its release. During its development, as other titles were created by Squaresoft, big ideas that were scrapped from various titles were absorbed into what would eventually become Chrono Trigger. Seeing enemies in the world and then battling those enemies on the same screen, combination attacks, multiple endings, and several parallel world maps to explore across time. The story of Chrono Trigger is the stuff of legends, but for a quick recap, the story picks up with Chrono bumping into Marle during the Millennial Fair. The two of them hit it off immediately and enjoy the festivities for a time, eventually checking out the debut of a new invention from Chrono's bestie, Luca. A machine that instantly transmits a person from one platform to the other. Marle wants to help demonstrate the new device, but some interference caused by Marle's pendant causes her to be flung into the wormhole. Chrono follows after her only to find they've been thrown back in time by 400 years. It's during this time that we find out that Marle's appearance in 600 AD inadvertently caused the kingdom to stop looking for her ancestor, Queen Leene. In doing so, Marle inadvertently caused herself to be ripped apart by the fabric of space and time, quickly and effectively introducing the basic concepts of the grandfather paradox. Chrono and Luca then take matters into their own hands to recover Queen Leene to restore Marle back into existence. Fast forward a bit through the following time-traveling escapades, and our trio find themselves cast into a post-apocalyptic future where humanity has been all but wiped out. Interfacing with some record-keeping terminals, Luca uncovers the truth of what happened to humanity. Lavos, a giant creature of unfathomable power, had erupted from the ground in 1999 AD and wreaked untold destruction, wiping out most life on the planet. Spurred on by this terrible knowledge, the three decide to do whatever it takes to keep that fate from befalling the planet, which sets them off time-trotting between past and future eras in hopes that they can avert the tragic future that lay in wait. Over the years, I've played through and finished Chrono Trigger a dozen times or more, to the point where I had nearly been desensitized to how incredible this game was upon its release. So much to the point where when I was playing Chrono Trigger critically for the purpose of this review, because I was so familiar and so comfortable with the game, I had to actively try to keep from switching into autopilot mentally, and I had to work to see the game with fresh eyes. Playing the game on PC this time around helped somewhat on that front. The new localization carried forward from the Nintendo DS port of the game was different enough to help give greater weight to some of the dialogue. In particular, a moment that occurred within the first hour of the game or so that really stood out to me was when Marle disappeared in Queen Lene's room in 600 AD. She screamed in pain at the feeling of being ripped apart by the fabric of time. Later, after Chrono and crew untwist the grandfather time travel paradox, she would later remark on the pain and loneliness of the experience and ponder if that's what it feels like to die. For the first time while reading that, it sank into me what what a horrifying and traumatizing experience that must have been for Marle. In previous experiences, though, this part of the story was practically ignored. Hooray! Marle is back, she takes a bow, and we move on. But this additional dialogue provided new gravity that cut through my expectations and really opened my now adult eyes to this game for the first time. And the implications of the dialogue as it applies to Chrono Cross has given me a lot to look forward to in a future review. From a storytelling perspective, the main questline of Chrono Trigger feels extremely fluidly pieced together. The end of each arc of the various times you visit ties perfectly into the introduction of the next story arc, resulting in a story that is easy to digest in small chunks, but still tells a cohesive overall story when taken in as a whole. The designers took pains to avoid having the players running a series of errands for NPCs, so there's no fetch quests to bog down the main story. The player is seldom left asking what to do or why. That is, until the final act of the game, which is very special in its own right. In the final act of Chrono Trigger, the worlds are opened up to the player to explore freely. At the end of time, a sort of home base for our time-traveling crew, you are able to speak with all of the members of your time-traveling entourage and get hints about unfinished business each would like to sort out before the big showdown with Lavos. And what's truly brilliant about the way the game handles these side quests is that while completely optional, each one helps build not only the world, but acts as the character development arc for each character, with the exception of Ayla, who tragically gets no such love.
I know better than to assume that everybody has played Chrono Trigger, so if you haven't, please skip ahead to this timestamp because I'm going to talk about some late game spoilers for a bit. Okay, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, but Chrono didn't get a character development arc though, and I kind of agree, kind of not. Since he's a silent protagonist, he doesn't go on his own side quest, so you're kind of right. However, I would argue that his side quest is his resurrection arc following his encounter with Lavos, where he is unceremoniously disintegrated in order to save his friends. And while he personally can't get any character development by necessity, he kind of gets some development by proxy. The game instead gives some extra unique dialogue to his mother and shows some unique animations from Marle if you have her in your party at the right moment, which helps further demonstrate that connection between Marle and Chrono. And while we're talking about spoilers for a minute, can we just take a moment to appreciate Squaresoft having the cojones to outright kill your protagonist in this game? Sure, you can resurrect him by following that side quest, but it is an optional side quest, and some players no doubt played through and beat Chrono Trigger with a Chronoless team with no idea that they could revive him.
Also, I would be remiss to not mention the fact that we can either recruit or kill Magus, one of the most iconic villains in JRPG history. Back in the day, I had no idea you could recruit Magus though, so I defeated him like any other boss fight. It's nothing revolutionary by today's standards, but it was revolutionary in 1995. One of the other really cool features of handling side quests this way was how they were leveraged to help implement different endings into the game. Completing certain side quests and not completing others would result in major differences to the ending that you would receive at the end of the game. Having multiple endings helps further emphasize the idea that the changes that you make in the past and future can have permanent and far-reaching effects, and as far as I can find, may be the first implementation of this kind in a Japanese RPG. Now that said, I did play through Chrono Trigger for this review several times through using New Game Plus, another first of its kind in a JRPG, which helps streamline viewing each ending, and honestly, the impact of these multiple endings is a little weak. Some of these endings are just a different background during the credit scroll, some offer additional closure for certain characters, and one of them grants you access to the developer room where you can read messages from the developers of Chrono Trigger. The endings are pretty neat, though only different on a surface level, so to judge the game unfairly by today's standards, it's probably not worth seeking out all of them. You'd be better off playing how you want to and then watching the extra endings online. While this aspect of the game might not shine quite as brightly as it once did, its effects are still being felt today. Chrono Trigger was wildly innovative from a game design standpoint. Every new innovation sort of feeds into the next, helping Chrono Trigger feel extremely cohesive. For example, there are no random encounters in Chrono Trigger. Instead, enemies can be seen on the dungeon map as you walk around in, Bumping into these enemies or otherwise triggering scripted fights will have your party members spread out into the room or onto the field, and combat will commence on the same map where you bumped into that enemy without any sort of visible transitions. The enemies that you fight in battle sequence are the same sprites that you bumped into, rather than the larger detailed enemy designs of Final Fantasy of the time. Chrono Trigger was a turn-based RPG that looked like an action RPG. The experience was so seamless and so slick that looking back, it's easy to take the simplicity for granted, but there's deceptively complex tech going on behind the scenes that makes these transitions so dang smooth. During combat, Chrono Trigger uses ATB, or Active Time Battle. This is a sort of cooldown timer between your character's turns, determined by the party member's speed stats. Each enemy and character have different speeds, so faster characters could potentially attack a few times in a row before a slow enemy gets to take their turn. Furthermore, in active mode, these cooldown timers will continue to progress for both enemies and party members while the player is navigating the battle menus, further emphasizing the need to act quickly, otherwise the player will forfeit extra turns to enemies. However, I normally switch to wait mode instead, which pauses those timers while navigating menus. This ATB helps tie into another combat feature, double and triple techs. When 2 or 3 party members have a full ATB bar, meaning that the cooldown timers are up, those members can act together in the same turn by using a dual or triple tech if they have unlocked one. And these can be unlocked by equipping some special items or by having characters fight alongside each other for a long enough time. Some of these gameplay mechanics have been emulated by other games since, but none that I have seen have been so fully integrated as what I've just described. Chrono Trigger may have been one of the first games to do away with random encounters, but its implementation was not perfect. There are some unavoidable scripted fights that are completely untelegraphed that may as well be random encounters, for instance, but overall, Chrono Trigger helped pave a new way forward for games to introduce combat, one which unfortunately hasn't been fully replicated to this day. The worlds of Chrono Trigger, as in each of the eras you get to explore throughout the game, each felt large and impressive. We were able to go on an adventure across the planet in prehistoric times, in antiquity, the Middle Ages, the present, the future of 2300 AD. That's 5 world maps to explore and appreciate, and the expanse was utterly mind-blowing in its time. And technically there's a 6th world map that you can explore if you count the floating city of Zeal in antiquity. Each world presented feels fully fleshed out, with Prehistoria probably feeling the least interesting out of the bunch, with fewer points of interest and dungeons to explore, and my personal favorite was Zeal, which not only contrasts perfectly with the Earthbound village, but is also visually both decadent yet serene, and features some of my favorite tracks from the game. Yasunori Mitsuda, a now legendary composer, is famous for their work in Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Xenogears, and many other titles, but he first cut his teeth while working on Chrono Trigger. Mitsuda composed dozens of unique tracks far above and beyond the standard of the time. His aim was to produce music that could exist in this world and not belonging to any particular genre. During production, a hard drive failure resulted in the complete loss of several works in progress, requiring him to seek assistance from Nobuo Uematsu in order to meet the deadline. This crunch, unfortunately, is likely what started his notorious and unfortunate habit of overworking himself to exhaustion on projects, at times severely affecting his health. You can question Mitsuda's methods, but you can't argue with the results. Mitsuda's work is legendary, and his work with Uematsu on Chrono Trigger is proof that his reputation was well earned. While we're talking about the soundtrack, as a neat aside, when it came time to release a soundtrack, Mitsuda didn't want to simply release console music onto a set of CDs, though that would eventually happen, but instead, he wanted to release an arranged acid jazz album called The Brink of Time, which I've been thoroughly enjoying over the last several months since discovering it. I highly recommend you seek out a copy if that's your cup of tea. To my great disappointment, it doesn't appear to have ever been released on vinyl, which is a shame because it would be perfect next to my Mother 1 arranged album. From a graphical perspective, Chrono Trigger is about as polished as they come on the Super Nintendo, and it is among my personal top 3 Super Nintendo RPGs, alongside the likes of Seiken Densetsu 3, now known as Trials of Mana in the West, as well as Terranigma, which gets my personal vote for Best Action RPG on the SNES. Bottom line, the game is gorgeous and it holds up well today, better even than most games half its age, I would argue. Chrono Trigger has been ported and released several times. It first received an enhanced port to the PlayStation along Final Fantasy IV in a combo pack called the Final Fantasy Chronicles. This port of the game included newly animated mid-game cutscenes by Toei Animation. This port was notorious for introducing load times to battles and while entering and leaving world maps due to undercooked optimization for the PlayStation hardware. I will say that I think these load times are often wildly overstated by fans, as the release was the first and only version of the game that I owned for several years, and I still loved playing the game this way on PlayStation 1. I have also heard that playing this version on PlayStation 2 significantly improves the loading times as well, and it isn't a terrible way to go if you're on a budget. Chrono Trigger was ported to the Nintendo DS as well, and even more new content was added to the game, including an ending that ties into the game's sequel, Chrono Cross, and a top-to-bottom re-localization that even included veteran Woolsey to help reprise his original work. I'll talk about that side content here in another moment or two. If playing on a handheld is super important to you, this is probably the way to go. However, it's getting harder and harder to find an affordable copy these days, so if you're really in a bind, you might consider the port of this game to iOS or Android. Finally, Chrono Trigger's smartphone port was again ported to PC and is available on Steam pretty cheaply. Initially, this port was extremely sloppily handled and was dragged through the mud for very good reason. However, since then, Square Enix has released a series of patches and updates to the game that actually bring it up to what I would say is the definitive way to play the game. The Steam port features a new widescreen presentation, all of the Nintendo DS content, and nearly every cutscene from the PS1 release of the game. For the life of me, I have no idea why some of the cutscenes were not included with this release, or why fans haven't created mods which restore the cut content, but maybe eventually it'll happen and become the undisputed, definitive way to play Chrono Trigger. Now getting back to that newly introduced Nintendo DS content for Chrono Trigger, I don't believe that it should be a determining factor in your decision of which version of Chrono Trigger to play. The new translation is very nice to have as a veteran to the game, and it helped me appreciate the game a little bit more. The extra dungeons, however, feel like a rather clumsy attempt to gild the lily, in which Square Enix falls short of the mark. The newly introduced dungeons and associated side quests amount to a series of repetitive fetch quests, which flies in the face of the original design philosophy that I mentioned earlier in this review. One of the quests in question has the player running back and forth between the quest giver and the end of a dungeon and back, then to another timeline to repeat the process several times, all the while running into the same scripted, unavoidable fights, further adding to the tedium. This quest line eventually culminated in a boss fight and a payoff that was kind of neat, but is otherwise not worth the tedium to get there. In New Game Plus, our protagonists gain access to 3 new dungeons, which grant 3 of the protagonists with new endgame gear and unlocks a special new ending that again ties into the events of Chrono Cross. These dungeons were less tedious and the ending was pretty neat overall. The gear is worth it, but the quality of the dungeon design feels amateurish and cheap in comparison to the rest of Chrono Trigger. My hopes for the DS content weren't exactly high going into it, yet I was still disappointed with the hack job. These dungeons were comprised of recycled assets from the rest of the game, with a garish palette swap applied to them. Similarly, they were populated with enemies that also featured palette swaps that weren't exactly keeping with the rustic aesthetic of the rest of the game. The quality of this side content would be a passable novel distraction if it were an unofficial ROM hack by a small team of enthusiasts, but you would likely get a far more fulfilling experience by playing one of those unofficial ROM hacks by a small team of enthusiasts such as the Crimson Echoes or Flames of Eternity ROM hacks, which both honestly look like they would put this official content to shame. But maybe that's a video for another day.
There are a number of $5 phrases I could use to describe Chrono Trigger. It was lightning in a bottle, and it was only possible because of the legendary Dream Team. Trying to really examine this iconic game for the first time with an analytic perspective has been an incredible experience to me. To finally see how everything sort of fits together so well in ways that I had just taken for granted all of these years. And to see maybe a few ways in which Chrono Trigger is not perfect, but boy does it ever come close. Chrono Trigger is an incredibly well-designed game that is so intricately crafted to look simple that you might only notice how fun it is. Chrono Trigger has earned itself a spot in the game collection.